Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Fechner, and welcome to our Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. It's also been a year of fear, a year of cutbacks, heartbreak, and loss. Long lines at testing sites, empty shelves at stores. A year when almost everything was either canceled or virtual. But there have been inspiring moments as well. Those frontline healthcare workers giving it their all for us. And now the vaccinations, the reunions, and the hope for a much brighter year ahead. Tonight we're going to look back while also reflecting on the year that has passed, a year we will never forget. Spectrum News 1's Allison Bruner leads us off now by taking us back.
For some of us, it's been more than 365 days since we could hug our loved ones, go maskless, see fans in the stands. However, we've learned so much and come so far as Wisconsinites. Here's some of the milestone moments from the past year. March truly turned maddening last year. The NBA suspends a season March 11th.
The game tonight has been postponed.
A sad day for Bucks fans as Milwaukee Bucks own the best record in the NBA and are a favorite to win the league title. No March Madness, no Wisconsin or Marquette basketball. Governor Tony Evers declares a public health emergency for coronavirus.
That this could develop much larger very quickly.
All Wisconsin public and private schools are forced to close. Wisconsin businesses forced to close, unsure of when they would open again. Meanwhile, each day the death toll in Wisconsin kept rising.
Our hospitalizations have nearly tripled.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court rejects Governor Evers' final effort to delay the April 7th election, leading to large crowds at the polls. The months went by, spring became summer. No Summerfest.
I haven't allowed my emotions to get in the way yet.
State fair canceled. Traditional graduation ceremonies canceled. There were ups and downs. The NBA season resumes July 31st. The Bucks then played in a bubble. The Democratic National Convention all but canceled as Milwaukee hoped to host thousands. Then by fall, glimmers of hope. COVID numbers leveled and even dropped. The vaccine is coming.
Our goal and what we have focused on since the beginning is getting as many shots into arms.
The Packers start the season September 13th. Some schools went back in person. Restaurant requirements eased up a bit. Now in the last few months, 3 different COVID vaccines. So far, nearly 900,000 Wisconsinites are fully vaccinated, and the CDC is lifting restrictions. However, it is not over.
America, God made thine.
But we have learned so much in the past year, and like true Wisconsinites, the hope is that this will only make us stronger.
This coronavirus originated in animals before making the jump to people. It's a common way that viruses have spread to humans throughout the course of history. Spectrum News 1's Jeff Dodd explores these types of infectious diseases and finds out what we've really only begun to learn about COVID-19.
So I'm joined with Tony Goldberg, a professor of epidemiology at the vet school at UW-Madison. Tony is an expert on zoonotic diseases. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Jeff.
So I guess I'll just kind of start off with zoonotic diseases. Can you tell me a little bit about them and kind of how the coronavirus is one?
Well, that pretty much says it. Zoonotic diseases are diseases that come from animals and infect people, and SARS coronavirus 2, which is the cause of the COVID-19 pandemic, is a big one. We've known about these types of diseases for centuries, so that's nothing new, and they keep popping up. And they keep infecting us from animal sources.
And so how do they make the jump from animals to people?
It's a good question. They jump in a whole bunch of different ways. You know, it might be through some kind of respiratory secretion or a bite or eating undercooked meat or, butchering a carcass. But the common theme is that for that kind of transmission to happen, an animal and a person have to be pretty close to each other, touching or nearly so. So it happens in situations where we are in contact with animals. That can be, we tend to think of it in far off places like the rainforest where somebody is hunting a monkey, but it can happen here in Wisconsin if someone's hunting a deer or if someone has close contact with a pet or a farm animal. So, infections are clever. When the opportunity arises, they can make the jump.
So is there something as a society that we're doing or how we're developing that maybe increases the chances of those interactions?
there's a lot of things that can increase the chance of interactions that lead to zoonotic disease transmission. We tend to think in terms of sort of global drivers, being things like deforestation, agricultural intensification, human population growth, sort of other changes to the environment, basically anything that brings people and animals into unusually close contact. So that's kind of the broad mechanisms, but on the ground, it's really just the consequence of an individual person making a decision or coming into contact inadvertently with an animal that's infected with something that people can get. So it really comes down to that one animal and that one person getting together in a new way.
So how concerned should we be, as we're kind of at the light of the end of the tunnel with this coronavirus, with the vaccine rollouts, how concerned should we be that another disease might jump from animals to human sometime in the future?
I think we can bet on it. The history of medicine is filled with examples of zoonotic diseases that have, some of them have come and gone, some of them have stayed. I mean, we're aware of West Nile virus, for example, that's here in North America to stay. Hopefully SARS coronavirus 2 will go away, but other diseases that afflict us like HIV AIDS, that originated a long time ago from a zoonotic transmission from a chimpanzee. So most diseases that plague us today have zoonotic origins. And in fact, if you look back far enough in the past, they all do. So we're part of an ecosystem, and we can absolutely expect that this will not be the last zoonosis.
So with that in mind, what should we take out of this pandemic?
Well, I think we can learn a lot of things from this pandemic. One of the things is, and I think everyone remembers of the early days, just how important rapid response is. Once we know we've got a problem, we really need to jump on it and contain it. In this case, I think we failed to do that adequately, as evidenced by the fact that the virus spread throughout the world. Now, there's a lot of blame games going on, and it's impossible to say what exactly we could have done differently. But, very aggressive containment of these things when they happen, ideally monitoring of high-risk human populations to detect them when they first get into people so we can take very rapid action. Unfortunately, when zoonotic diseases become established in people and start to spread, we're in the position we're in now. It becomes a public health crisis. So as Benjamin Franklin liked to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Tony. That's all the time that we have, but I appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise.
You're very welcome.
For the past year or so now, so much immeasurable heartbreak at nursing homes. The seniors have only been able to see their kids and their grandkids through a window. Now restrictions at Wisconsin's long-term care facilities are slowly being lifted out there, but as Spectrum News 1's Megan Carpenter found out, those in-person visits are still far from what they once were.
For some families who haven't seen their loved ones in many months, it's a blessing to be able to see them at all.
Yeah. We weren't used to the beard.
Gene Brandvold takes care of everything. Just ask his wife, Myrtle.
We're coming around, but now the only thing that worries me is taxes.
They've been married 58 years, and Myrtle never knew sitting in the same room with him would feel like such a gift.
There probably hasn't been many times when you've been apart.
No.
Her daughter, Linda, sits beside her.
Well, one of his favorite things at home was just sitting in a chair in the garage and watching the cars go by.
Yes.
She's elated to share even the most ordinary things with her dad.
Even the mundane things like windshield wiper fluids.
Gene's a man of few words.
Did you miss them, Gene?
Yes.
But there aren't many words to describe just how much.
Yes, very much so.
Myrtle and Linda consider themselves lucky. They relied on a window to see Gene only for a month or so before they could all be together again.
Through the window was wonderful because
it was kind of exciting.
Yeah, it was to see him, to literally see his face.
But they wish they could hold Gene's hand. They wish they could hug him.
We're all managed.
We're working on it.
OCC opened up to limited visits a couple of months ago, still with a long list of rules. Administrator Marissa Janke says it's tough to watch.
It was really, really heartbreaking because Their residents are sitting 6 feet apart from their family member. They can't hold hands, they can't hug, they can't celebrate the fact that they're finally physically together.
It's not where she hoped they'd be a year later, especially since nearly the entire facility is now vaccinated.
The CDC, CMS, the Department of Health Services, they haven't lifted any restrictions for us. We're not able to do anything really operationally differently than we did back in September.
In the meantime, Linda, Myrtle, and Jean make do.
Just being in the same room, brings tears to your eyes.
Finding joy in the little things.
Got the popcorn.
And knowing there will come a day when 6 feet apart is just a memory.
Still to come on the Spectrum News 1 special, a year of COVID. Healthcare workers have been heroes on the front lines of this pandemic, but the long hours and stressful work environment have taken their toll on those heroes' mental health. We'll talk with two healthcare workers to learn about the steps they're taking to cope with the ongoing pandemic. Stick with us. Welcome back to our Spectrum News 1 special, a year of COVID. And after a year spent treating COVID patients, many healthcare workers are justifiably wiped out right now, putting their own lives on the line each and every day to treat what at times seemed like an endless stream of patients out there. Spectrum News 1's Savannah Tomei introduces us now to two of those healthcare workers and learn what's helping them to get to the pandemic's finish line.
A year on the front lines is likely to leave a lasting mark on our doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers.
There's a lot of alarms.
It's nearly constant at UW's COVID ICU.
Because there were so many patients that were so sick. This is something I've never seen before.
This last year has taken a toll on respiratory therapist Angie Filner.
We see patients lose their battle time and time again. So that was hard. That was very hard.
Doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers experience stress and trauma like never before.
All of the suffering, all of the loss of life we've seen this last year.
Dr. Ann Sheehy has had lots of tough moments.
It was a really tough night, and I had a patient with COVID who wasn't doing well, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and unexpectedly, I think I became really emotional and surprising to myself, because I think we really try not to show those feelings. And it was one of our care team leaders, one of the nurses I've worked with for many years, who really stood by me and just talked to me.
The people who tried to keep us safe and healthy could be needing help of their own.
A lot of healthcare providers are going to need mental health resources and other sorts of support.
A study published in January showed healthcare workers in North and Central America have a lot of weight on their shoulders right now. More than half had symptoms of depression or anxiety, and nearly 30% had signs of PTSD. Now, some can't even deal with those feelings yet.
There's some things I still can't really reflect on yet because they've been really hard. Once we do really truly cross that finish line, then I think a lot of us will be able to process a lot of those thoughts and a lot of the challenges and a lot of the sadness and loss we've seen this year.
There's now light at the end of the tunnel. She was the third person at UW Health to get the vaccine.
I will never forget that day. I have never been so excited to get a shot in my life.
That sadness and trauma won't just go away once everyone is vaccinated. The emotional baggage will linger.
I think there will be some anger, frankly. We were doing as much as we could in the hospital, but we needed more help from Unified Public Health Message, for example, about mask wearing, and we couldn't get that. And I think it was really hard for some of us to understand.
But other emotions, other memories will linger too.
I'm hoping the resilience will stick with me.
People here have just looked out for each other. I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you, Savannah. The first deaths tied to COVID-19 in Wisconsin were confirmed on March 19th of 2020. And that same day came the first death in Milwaukee, 66-year-old Lawrence Riley. He was a Navy veteran, a retired Milwaukee firefighter, and most importantly, a loving husband and father. 1 year later, Spectrum News 1's Marty Glazer takes us to a place that represents Lawrence to a T.
Here at Lincoln Park Golf Course, everyone knew Lawrence Riley by name. Not because he was the first person in Milwaukee to die from coronavirus, but because it's a year later and there's not a day that goes by that they don't wish he was still here.
I brought you here because me and my father used to play here the most. He introduced me to the game of golf.
From the time Elvon Riley was 7 years old, his father's love of golf is something they both shared.
So, this is like one of our times. No matter if I was a rebellious teenager or a snotty brat kid, we would always have good times here. There we go.
And it's those memories with his dad he will always treasure.
He took his golf serious, was a really good golfer before he died, played courses all over the world, and this is his passion.
When Elvon's out on the course, his father's passion is still very much alive.
Just finding that balance, sometimes I just play, I kind of hear him talking to me, in a way it's kind of weird. It's like that spiritual connection, because I know how much he loved the game of golf.
And golf was just one of the many things they had in common.
Me, in the military was one of his biggest moments, him seeing me graduate boot camp.
A proud father whose son followed in his footsteps.
I just came back from Japan, and I came back that September, and he died about 6 months later. Yeah, he died in March, so I came back September, and he died in March.
Lawrence was diabetic and suffered from a breathing condition known as COPD.
It's kind of like that last tipping point on the scale. Yeah, so, you never thought, this would be, his downfall. The end of him, would be this unknown virus that, a year ago we just thought it was something on the news, it just can't hit our country, and it hit us hard. It took, somebody I cared about, somebody I loved from my life, my mother's life, from my siblings' life, so.
Elvon is one of 7 who's honored to carry his father's legacy forward.
I'm super proud. I'm really proud to be his son. Really proud to have been, raised by him and taught the lessons and, how to be, not just a man, but just a human being. He made all of us, everybody who was around him, greater human beings.
And on this sunny day out on the course, Lawrence Riley's still passing on his gifts.
Continue to make him proud and, continue to do the things that he enjoyed. If he was here right now, he'd be on the golf course.
Still to come here on this Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. We're going to sit down one-on-one with Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers, what he remembers from those early days of COVID-19, and an update on Wisconsin getting to that light at the end of the tunnel. Stay with us. Welcome back to our Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. It essentially shut down the country more than a year ago now, and every day since COVID-19 has touched our lives. Through it all, so far, more than 500,000 Americans with the virus have died. We want to take a look back at some of the headlines now from those tumultuous last 12 months, specifically how our political leaders steered the U.S. through this pandemic. Here's our chief national political reporter, Josh Robin.
This new virus can spread through coughing, sneezing.
Chinese authorities trying desperately to slow that rapid spread.
For more than a year, our leaders have scrambled to contain COVID-19. President Donald Trump may escape blame for not predicting a once-in-a-century pandemic, but he paid the political price for how he responded. Unfairly or not, on his watch, the nation crossed unthinkable milestones. Still, there's nuance. With U.S. funding,
the U.S. gives the green light for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Vaccine development shattered records. Trump's support for early lockdowns saved lives. He quickly banned flights from China, though his talk about COVID-19,
the horrible China virus,
is more controversial. Many also say he politicized science and alienated the U.S. when he pulled funding from the World Health Organization. Trump also downplayed the threat to Americans.
It's a little like the regular flu.
Behind closed doors, admitting
it's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
But as the nation reeled, more Americans than not approved of their president's actions. Trump signed 2 bipartisan stimulus measures, deployed the military, and oversaw a COVID task force. Then, about 7 months before the election, Trump saw the economic toll and demanded reopening.
I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
On paper, Trump deferred to states on lockdowns. In reality, he harped on Democratic governors to open up. His poll numbers dropped. Many saw taming COVID as a prerequisite to opening the economy. Then there were masks. Mostly defiant, Trump landed in the hospital a month before Election Day. Across the aisle, Joe Biden's caution drew ridicule. But as Trump rallied, Biden's largely cyber campaign won. Now president, the Democrat embraces something that eluded his predecessor, being consoler-in-chief.
To heal, we must remember.
Much of the country remains closed. But the pace of vaccinations is quickening, and Americans could soon start receiving stimulus payments. 2022 may end up looking something like 2019. If so, fairly or not, the 46th, not the 45th president may get more credit.
Our thanks to Spectrum News 1's chief national political reporter Josh Robin for that look back. From the national headlines now to the ones made here in Wisconsin, as Governor Tony Evers spent the past year trying to navigate the pandemic, the legislature, and support out of Washington. From that first safer at home order to the ongoing vaccine rollout, Spectrum News 1's Anthony DeBruzzi sat down with the governor for insight into the year that was and what's still to come.
I want to talk about 1 year later. Is this where you thought we would be with the pandemic? Are we ahead of where you expected? Are we behind of what you expected, say, maybe a few months into the pandemic last year?
It's been hard to predict, frankly. I never thought it was going to be a short-lived thing, but I would say once we reached into the fall and we're having those huge spikes of cases being reported every single day, it became apparent it was going to be a long-term opportunity for us to really come together as a state.
Whether positive or negative, what would you say are some contributing factors that got us to where we're at right now?
The resiliency of the people of Wisconsin is just amazing. Every day, whether it's Spectrum One or other media outlets covering stories of people helping each other out, neighbors helping others, and it was just it was really good to see how Wisconsinites really pulled together around this. The difficulty, frankly, were things that even today I look back, just didn't have to happen. And the constant fighting about whether we're going to have a mask mandate or not, or whether this is going to be approved in the court of law or not, and all those things are frankly distractions. We had a hard time as a state and as a country of kind of coming together about we're going to follow the science, and the science tells us this.
We're still in the middle of a pandemic, but as you said, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So in what we hope are the remaining months, is there something you would like to see the legislature accomplish?
Right now, I think we need to focus on this next budget. This next budget is going to be kind of the important movement point, inflection point, where we really do not only recover from this pandemic, but we move forward from this pandemic. And I think we need to do both of those same things at the same time. So if I had my hope around the legislature is that they focus on the upcoming budget. It's what we're going to need to do long term in order to really move forward from this pandemic, in addition to helping solve it now.
Let's talk about the finish line. Is there a metric, a trend, a feeling What is it going to take for Wisconsinites to be able to return to life as normal?
It will be around the number of cases that we have. But the important thing is getting these shots and that solution around lowering the number of cases to as low a number as possible. Those two things are intertwined. We have to make sure that we're in a position to get as many people vaccinated as possible.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Governor.
Thanks a lot, Anthony, and we'll continue to keep you informed.
You'll find a deeper dive into a year of COVID through the Spectrum News app, where you can read and watch many other stories about COVID-19 now 1 year later. Download the free Spectrum News app now on all your devices and get your latest Wisconsin news and weather wherever you are 24/7. In our next half hour of the Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID, we're going to dive deeper into what's next for Wisconsin as vaccines continue to ramp up statewide and the world begins to adjust to a new normal out there. We'll also check in with restaurants and schools to see what they're doing to try to get back open. That's all ahead on this Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. Welcome back to our Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. I'm Jason Fechner. Thank you so much for joining us here as we reflect and look ahead. Since March of 2020 now, the coronavirus pandemic has dominated the headlines, and it's been a constant influx of new and evolving information out there. Spectrum News 1's national health reporter, Aaron Billups, looking back at some of the biggest challenges and triumphs of the ongoing pandemic.
As countries abroad sounded alarms in January, U.S. officials warned against panic.
At this point, Americans should not worry for their own safety.
There is no reason for anyone right now in the United States, with regard to coronavirus, to wear a mask.
Limited supply of protective gear for healthcare workers drove those early recommendations, despite clues that the coronavirus could be airborne. It's now clear not wearing masks was one of the many missteps made as experts struggled to understand and contain the virus while also grappling with a rapidly growing number of people falling ill. And the U.S. was initially flying through the crisis with impaired vision.
It's very important that the CDC really continues testing and expands testing. We don't want to end up in a situation where these infections and the virus flies under the radar.
But that's exactly what happened. The virus spread. Hospitals and intensive care units filled up as the virus unleashed a storm of inflammation on patients' organs.
We need as many ventilators as we possibly can get right now.
The search for treatments was trial and error, but there have also been many wins.
Now people are put on steroids when they're in the hospital. They're not ventilated as quickly.
Treatments like monoclonal antibodies may help some patients avoid hospitalization altogether. The greatest story of triumph throughout the past year of trials may be the rapid discovery, research, and approval of a COVID-19 vaccine.
It bodes well for the future, a vaccine that is 90% protective.
As the country braced itself for a second major wave in coronavirus cases, 2 highly effective vaccines were approved for emergency use.
What we're seeing now is the culmination of years of research.
But just as the light at the end of the tunnel got brighter, there were problems with the vaccine rollout and the discovery of more contagious coronavirus variants in circulation.
The current vaccines will also cover these new variants.
A reminder, experts say, not to let down our guard, wear masks, and continue to social distance. With a third vaccine available and a greater understanding of the virus, there is renewed hope. There's a future beyond the pandemic.
Joining us now is Spectrum News 1 digital journalist Maddie Burikoff. Maddie, thank you so much for joining us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, you have chronicled so much of the pandemic in Wisconsin now over the past year. Before we look ahead, take us back to when COVID first hit us in Wisconsin and hit us the hardest here.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen some ups and downs over the course of the pandemic here in Wisconsin. I guess the first kind of big up was over the summer around July when we saw a bit of a spike as cases rose, but really the big major surge we saw was over the fall and into the winter, when we saw cases really starting to climb exponentially and seemingly, without end. We saw hospitals filling up, and our state officials were warning that we were really in a major crisis in terms of COVID-19. And since then, we've seen our numbers dip down quite a bit. Just to give some sense of the difference there, in November, when this peak really hit its highest point, we were seeing upwards of 2,000 people in the hospital with COVID-19, and now that number is more like 200 COVID-19 patients.
Great to see out there. And a quick follow-up on that. I know a lot of states are starting to see potentially a third potential spike down the road there, but when it comes to actual cases in Wisconsin, nothing like that here yet.
Not that we've seen yet. There has been some concern with, the COVID variants that are popping up, so we'll see how those play out. But so far, our numbers are looking more like they did back last summer before those surges started to hit.
Knock on wood, brighter days ahead. Looking ahead now to that vaccination rollout. Various timelines for eligibility and availability out there, and they keep moving up. Where do things stand right now here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, as you said, the timelines have really sped up. And so recently, Wisconsin just opened up to a lot more people with underlying conditions, all these things that would put them at higher risk of a worse COVID-19 case. And that was a big phase that just opened up. And that phase came actually a week earlier than the DHS had originally expected. And in terms of looking ahead, the DHS says that by May 1st, any adult in the general public should be able to sign up, and we should have enough vaccines to get to them over the summer.
Signs of hope on the horizon for all of us. Maddie, you've also had countless opportunities now to talk with a lot of people all across Wisconsin during the pandemic. Which of those stories maybe stick out most to you right now?
Yeah, I definitely have talked to a lot of people, and I think the ones that really stand out are how many people are looking out to help each other and help the community. It's been such a hard year for everyone, and still there are so many people who are looking to make a difference. I've talked to scientists who have turned from the normal work they'd be doing to develop COVID tests and track cases, and, community leaders who are working hard to get their neighbors access to COVID testing and COVID care when they may be historically overlooked. And of course, all the healthcare workers who are taking care of COVID patients while also worrying about their own health and their families. And these are the kinds of stories, I guess, that I've been holding on to as we've been facing a really challenging year.
Maddie, a final question for you, a yes or no answer. Will you ever forget the past year that was?
Oh, definitely not.
You are definitely not alone. You can read all of Maddie's incredible work and a fantastic timeline right now through the free Spectrum News app. Spectrum News 1 digital journalist Maddie Burikoff. Maddie, thank you so much for joining us here. Still to come on the Spectrum News 1 special, a year of COVID. Bars and restaurants have taken it on the chin over the past year. 100 shutting down for good. Virtually the rest struggling to make it to the next day, all to try to make it to the end of the pandemic. Now, as restrictions begin to loosen up, we'll revisit one Wisconsin establishment to look in on their hopeful recovery going forward. Stay with us. Welcome back to our Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. While the pandemic brought countless challenges to restaurants and especially restaurant workers, we have also witnessed their amazing generosity over the past 12 months. Take the Black Sheep restaurant in Whitewater, for instance. When the pandemic first hit, they offered free community meals to anyone in need out there and kept that up for several months as they tried to figure out how to keep the lights on themselves. Spectrum News 1's Ryan Burke checked back in with the chef there to see how the restaurant is doing now as it tries to navigate the slow return towards normalcy.
The restaurant business is notoriously unpredictable, but no one could have ever imagined just how unpredictable the pandemic would be. And here in Whitewater, in order to survive, it's taken creativity and a lot of cautious optimism.
Ramona, we're plating you in about 2 seconds, okay?
Working in a restaurant kitchen is a high-pressure environment.
constantly adapting and balancing new challenges. A metaphor for the past year for Chef Tyler Salisbury.
Being prepared for anything, but being prepared for the things that don't go right. And I think that that's what this year is. A whole lot of things that didn't go quite right. And we needed to adjust that.
Adjusting quite a bit, boxing up more carry-out orders than orders on plates, something unthinkable a year ago.
But no, never in my life would I ever have thought this is what my restaurant would look like.
Yeah, you can just pay for it when you come pick it up at the restaurant.
Chef Tyler has rolled with the punches on many fronts. 60% of his business is catering.
Declined or screeching halt. I think those words could be used interchangeably. But it just stopped. And if anything could be done, it wasn't profitable for us.
The restaurant tried many different avenues to keep business up. Some worked well, like virtual cooking classes and to-go cocktail kits. Others were more of a struggle.
We offered delivery and hired a delivery driver. The demand wasn't there, which ended up costing us because we paid for a delivery driver to be here and we didn't have the delivery demand.
In recent weeks, the restaurant has been seeing a slow return towards a bit of normal. More people coming in person. Something promising, but also something creating a new challenge.
We're trying to balance how do we continue to support those takeout customers, but now that the restaurant's getting busy, how do we make sure that we make money?
And while there's reason for hope, the stress remains.
Every restaurant took on a substantial amount of debt last year. I'm very, very thankful that we've been around for a long time and we had the ability to do that. But that means that there's going to come a time when we pay all of that back. I plan on being here. Whether that's a wise business choice or a stubbornness, I plan on being here.
Determination to keep going, even when the going gets tough.
Give me a 2-minute warning on those grits.
Spectrum News 1's Ryan Burke there in Whitewater for us. Ryan, thank you so much. And shifting gears to the pandemic's impact on sports, specifically high school sports now, with football sidelined in the fall and returning for some this spring. While the calendar may have flipped for the season, for the players, the intensity, the drive, the passion for the game, all of that remains the same. Spectrum News 1's Megan Marshall introduces us to the boys in Menasha as they get ready for a season unlike any other.
High school football teams normally start practicing during the dog days of summer. With temperatures in the low 30s, it doesn't quite feel the same.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the end of the season, like the playoff times, but it's definitely nice knowing that it's going to get warmer.
The Menasha Blue Jays, like many other Wisconsin teams, are preparing for a spring football season.
It was really nice to get the pads back on, getting a hit.
Menasha's fall season was canceled due to COVID-19 concerns after only a few practices and a scrimmage. The team's last game was in 2019 when they narrowly lost the Division III state championship. This season will be different.
We were told right from the start that there wasn't going to be a state, there wasn't going to be a playoffs or anything along those lines. But I mean, if you look at how many kids are still out here right now, they're here because they love to play the game.
Head coach Jeremy Korth focused on giving his seniors one last chance to play.
He kept us motivated by saying, I'm going to do everything I can for you guys. I'm going to make sure you seniors have at least somewhat of a season. I'm going to do what I can for you.
For us, we always preach, best possible outcome. Control what you can control.
One silver lining to the strange season, the coaching staff used their downtime to evaluate and improve their program, especially in the weight room.
Some of the things that we came across were better than we've ever done before. And, we will train differently from here on out.
From the fall season to now, we're a much better team, and I feel like we use that time pretty well. So we're pretty developed now.
You can tell everybody from the fall has really made a gain, and muscle-wise, just size-wise, everything. I mean, everybody's hitting harder. These juniors are hitting pretty good, too.
The Blue Jays' schedule is unlike any they've ever seen. They'll host 4 games in front of limited fans. Their 3 road games will average about 130 miles of travel. But none of that seems to faze these guys.
I just want to play football. That's about it.
Still to come on the Spectrum News 1 special, a year of COVID. The pandemic has impacted our kids just as hard as it's impacted adults, sometimes even more. We'll explore how a year spent in virtual classrooms has impacted students statewide in Wisconsin. That's next. Stay with us. Welcome back to our Spectrum News 1 special, A Year of COVID. Students and teachers across Wisconsin are armed with a whole new set of skills after having to spend part, if not all of the past year now in virtual classrooms. While some districts are now back in person, others are still learning exclusively online due to the ongoing pandemic. Spectrum News 1's Griselda Perez checked in on what this past year taught our teachers and just how important of a role school has played in getting back to normal.
Keyboards and screens became an essential part of the school supply list. As districts across the state begin to plan for full in-person classes, teachers look back on some learned lessons.
How would you summarize these past 365 days?
I mean, of course, challenging comes to mind. I think everybody would say that. There's going to be times where it seems like a total train wreck, of course. So I really had to step back. If I'm going into it with that mindset, my students are going to have that mindset, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So I've constantly been checking myself, hey, there's more to it than surface level.
For Green Bay area schools, the option of in-person came early March. Both educators and health experts raised the importance of classroom involvement. According to the CDC, nearly 30% of virtual students reported worsening mental health versus a 15% of students in classrooms.
Have conversations not related to math. I teach math, but have a conversation about their life or their family, what they do, which is really hard to do virtually to build those relationships. But it's been very good, very positive. We've had zero issues with safety protocols, but it's been a very, very, very positive thing.
School districts approached reopening at different capacities. Wausau School District, like many districts, faced backlash from parents and students on the decision to start the school year fully virtual.
People can argue about whether we should have been virtual or virtual or in person. I thought we took a very sensible approach, a learning experience. It's been a challenge, no surprise.
Regardless of class sizes or how material was presented, constant changes made for constant reminders of the end goal.
As I think back I can't believe it's been a year. What's being reinforced is total dedication to kids from school staff and how important schools are.
The CDC continues to guide schools across the nation on steps to safely have kids in classrooms, most recently changing recommendations of social distancing from 6 feet to 3, becoming another sign towards normacy.
Thank you, Griselda. And as we continue to look back at the year that was, most of us will never forget what this past year has been like, living through hopefully the only pandemic we will ever face. And as Spectrum News 1's Megan Carpenter found out, 3 Wisconsin women are doing their part to make sure that the year that was will now be ingrained in history.
We all have a personal story for how this pandemic has drastically changed our lives over the past year. And here at the UW-La Crosse Library, a group of women has made it their mission to ensure those stories are never forgotten.
I knew that many of my students had their cameras off.
It's a strange feeling for Elise Primrose as she reads a journal entry from one of her favorite professors.
Teaching black screens was the closest I've ever been to being blind or deaf, as my senses were gone.
The UW-La Crosse graduate looks back on this past year.
These are pictures that have just been taken all over the campus showing all the different ways that the student body and our community has been affected.
A part of history forever preserved at the UWL Library, archived for future generations.
Especially seeing these students who felt like massive loneliness and were like, I haven't seen my friends in weeks.
For the past few months, Elise, Professor Kate Eartham, and archivist Laura Godin have been collecting memories.
One of the students that lived there had written help on their window. We assume that this is the quarantine dormitory.
Memories from their peers.
The epidemic affected me greatly.
In letter and photo form.
A student working in a lab with their professor who is standing 6 feet away from them.
reflecting how COVID-19 has changed their lives.
I thought it would be a great project to do my senior year, and I also just thought that it was something that was so important to our community.
Archives preserve the records that historians use in the future.
Professor Ertham picks up a letter from one of her students.
This student, his dad picked him up at the airport in Thailand and had him stripped down into his underwear and hosed him off in the lawn.
Countless emotions within each page, now safeguarded inside a single box.
We all went through such a similar thing.
For years to come.
To participate in that project, simply visit the Spectrum News app right now, tapping on a year of COVID there. You can read and watch many other stories about COVID-19 now 1 year later. Download the Spectrum News app now on all your devices and get your latest Wisconsin news and weather wherever you are. I'm Spectrum News 1's Jason Fechner. We want to thank you for joining us over the past hour here to reflect on a year that we will never forget. And as the pandemic rolls on, heartfelt thanks go out to all of those who have sacrificed so that we could all make it through. From those working long hours at a grocery store to volunteers stepping up at food banks, and of course to nurses and doctors treating those with COVID in our hospitals out there. All doing their best to get us closer to the end of this pandemic as Wisconsin works to move in the only direction it knows, forward.